4 men in expensive suits knocked on the door of a studio apartment in Billings, Montana. The man who answered was 71 years old, wearing a janitor's uniform, home 20 minutes off a night shift. He didn't know them. Then the one in front spoke.
Do you remember us? November 1983, South Dakota. You fixed our van.
Pete Kessler stood in his doorway and 25 years came off the wall at him all at once. He'd stopped when everyone else had driven by. They promised to come back. He'd never believed them. Nobody comes back. But here they were, and one of them was already crying. Hi everyone, welcome to Tales Unveiled. I think you're really going to enjoy this one, so make sure you stick around and listen till the end. Let's get into it. Pete Kessler was packing his tools into boxes at 11 o'clock at night when he heard a guitar. It was faint. It came and went with the wind from somewhere down the highway east of town. Then it stopped. He carried a box out to the trunk and stood in the yard, listening. Nothing. Just the wind coming across the stubble fields and snow starting, small and dry. The garage had been his for 23 years. Kessler Auto Repair, Coldwater, South Dakota, population 1200. By 9 the next morning, it belonged to the bank. He went back in for another box. The foreclosure had gone through 2 days before, and the man from the bank was coming for the keys at 9. 23 years of work had come apart in 3. The divorce, his wife taking their daughter Julie out to California, the lawyer he couldn't afford, and then the loans he couldn't cover once the lawyer was done with him. Then the guitar again, closer than he'd thought, out on the highway. Pete walked down to the end of the lot to hear it better. 46 years old, broke, and leaving in the morning. His brother Roy had lined up construction work for him in Montana. Manual labour, starting from nothing at an age when most men are starting to slow down. The truck was already half loaded behind him. The 2-lane that ran through Coldwater was empty in both directions except for the one set of hazard lights, maybe half a mile out, blinking orange in the dark. A van pulled into the shoulder. Somebody was playing a guitar in a broken down van in the snow at 11 at night in the middle of South Dakota. Pete stood with his keys in his hand. Not your problem, he told himself. You're gone in 10 hours. You don't owe anybody in this town anything, and you owe strangers on the highway even less. But it was the sound of it. Not the notes, the feeling under the notes. Somebody playing to fill time with something slipped away from them. He knew that sound. He'd made it himself. In the same garage 23 years ago, the night he put his own guitar in its case and told himself it was temporary. The temperature was dropping through the 20s and the van's engine wasn't running. Whoever was out there had no heat. Pete put the box down, got his toolbox and his flashlight and drove out. There were 4 of them, early 20s, long hair, denim jackets that were nowhere near enough for a South Dakota November. They came around the van when his headlights hit them, breath standing in the air, and the one holding the acoustic guitar stepped forward first. Dark hair, thin face, eyes that looked 10 years older than the rest of him. Pete asked how long they'd been sitting there. About 2 hours, the kid said. The engine had died at 9 and wouldn't turn over, and nothing had come past but 2 trucks and a sheriff's cruiser that slowed down, looked, and kept going. The van was a Dodge, a 75, and when Pete had got the hood up and the flashlight on it, he nearly laughed. The engine was held together with duct tape, hose clamps and hope. It took him about 4 minutes to find the trouble. The fuel pump was finished, and the radiator had a leak that had been getting worse for a long time. He told them straight. The van wasn't driving anywhere tonight. He asked whether they'd thought about a tow. The kid said they had $32, and then said it again, in case Pete thought he'd misheard. Not for the tow, altogether, between the 4 of them. Pete looked at them again. The van had Washington plates and about 300,000 miles of road grime on it. Sleeping bags in the back, amplifiers, a drum kit broken down, and wedged to the roof. He asked where they were headed. Chicago, the kid said, and then his voice tightened up a full note, and he said they had to be there at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Had to. He said it the way a man says a thing he can't afford to hear come back at him. Pete asked what was in Chicago. A record company man, the kid said, and gave the label's name like it was a password. He'd heard their demo tape and he wanted to meet them, and out of the 40 labels, he was the only one who'd answered at all. They'd been on the road 3 years, dive bars, country fairs, anywhere with a plug socket, sleeping in the van, living on nothing. The demo had taken every cent they had and money that wasn't theirs on top of it. The drummer, a stocky kid with a beard, said quietly that the people they'd borrowed from wanted it back in 30 days, and then he let the rest of the sentence go. Pete stood in the snow doing the arithmetic. Chicago was 570 miles east. The parts store in the country seat opened at 7. Say the pump was in stock. Say he had it in his hand by 8. Fitted by 10, radiator patched. They'd roll at 10:30 and be lucky to see Chicago by 8 in the evening. 6 after the only meeting of their lives had finished. He didn't say any of that yet. He said he could tow them into town and get them warm, and they'd sort the rest out at the garage. The kid asked what the tow would cost. Just get in the truck, he replied. The garage was warm and lit up and full of boxes, and none of them asked about the boxes, which Pete was glad of. The kid with the guitar was called Danny, the drummer was Mike, the bass player was Joey, and the quiet one who hadn't said 3 words on the highway was Kurt. Danny didn't offer the band's name, and Pete didn't ask for it. They were 4 kids in a dying Dodge and $32. The name could wait until it was worth something. Pete got the van on the lift and started in on the radiator, because that much he could do tonight. The 4 of them stood around drinking his coffee and thawing out, and after a while Danny drifted off over to the far wall, where a guitar hung on 2 nails above a workbench. A Gibson, an old one, strings gone grey with dust. Danny asked if he played. Used to, Pete said, long time ago. He kept working while he told it, because it was easier to say to a radiator than to a face, and he told it plain. He'd had a band once. 1960. They were good. Good enough that a man from Columbia Records wanted to see them in Chicago. And the week before that meeting, Pete's girlfriend told him she was expecting. And his father took sick, and there were bills, and there was the garage his uncle was selling cheap. So he didn't go. He got married, bought the garage, hung the guitar on the wall, and told himself he'd take it down again when things had settled. Things never settled. The marriage went, and the daughter went with it, and the garage was going in the morning, and the guitar was still on the wall with dust on the strings. The 4 of them had gone very quiet. Danny asked him one question, whether he regretted it. Pete worked on the radiator a while before he answered. Every single day. Nobody said anything after that. There wasn't anything to say. Danny went and sat on the floor with his back against the tool cabinet and his guitar in his lap. Not playing it, just holding it. There was a little portable tape recorder up on the workbench with its spools turning. One of the cheap ones with a plastic handle. Pete noticed it around midnight and asked if it was on. Danny said it was always on. 3 years in that van and they taped everything. Rehearsals, arguments, radio stations fading out over Nebraska. It was how they wrote. Tape was cheaper than forgetting, he said, so you left it running and sorted it out later. Pete let it turn. It was their electric. By 2 in the morning, he had the radiator holding pressure and the fuel pump housing stripped and ready, and there was nothing else he could do without the part. And that was when he finally said out loud what he'd known on the highway. Even with the pump fitted first thing, that van would reach Chicago 6 hours after the meeting was over. There was no version of the arithmetic that worked. Danny took it standing up, which Pete gave him credit for. Then he sat down on the floor again, and he had exactly the look Pete had worn in his own mirror in 1960, and Pete couldn't stand it. He went to the office and picked up the phone. Roy Kessler answered on the 5th ring, at 2:20 in the morning, with the particular tone of an older brother who already knows this is going to cost him something. Pete laid it out. Roy was hauling a compressor rig to a job site outside Chicago that week and had been planning to run it Thursday. Pete needed him to run it now. Leave inside the hour, swing down through Coldwater, take 4 passengers, have them in the city by 2 the following afternoon. Roy pointed out that it was 2 in the morning. Pete said he knew what time it was. Roy pointed out that Pete was supposed to be leaving that town himself in about 7 hours. Pete said he knew that too. There was a long quiet on the line, the kind their family used instead of arguing, and then Roy said he'd want a coffee waiting and hung up. Pete came back into the bay and told them to be ready at 4. Joey asked why. Why a man would do all that for strangers the night before he lost everything. For $32, he clearly wasn't going to take. Pete looked at the Gibson on the wall and told them the truth, which was that 23 years ago, he'd had his own Chicago, and he hadn't gone, and he'd been paying the instalments on that decision ever since. These four still had theirs in front of them. That was the whole of it. Danny said something about how Pete could still play. Pete shut it down the way he always shut it down. Music doesn't wait for you, he said. You get older, your hands stiffen, the world moves along without asking. They still had their shot in front of them, and they were to take it, and not end up standing in the garage at 46 telling this story to somebody else. They slept where they could, on the office couch and the floor, under moving blankets. Pete didn't sleep. He sat in the bay with the coffee going and his tools half in boxes around him, in the building he'd spent his whole adult life inside, listening to four strangers breathe. Now, I want you to keep hold of one small thing about those boys, because the story is going to want it later. Tape was cheaper than forgetting. That was how they lived. They didn't decide what mattered and then record it. They recorded everything and worked out what mattered afterwards. Roy's headlights swung into the lot at 5 to 4 in the morning, and they loaded in the dark. 2 up front with Roy, 2 in the jump seats behind, guitars across their knees because Danny wouldn't put his in the back with the compressor. Danny tried the $32 on Pete one last time, standing by the truck door with the snow coming down through the yard light. Pete folded the kid's hand shut around it. By 4, breakfast, past 7 falls. Danny said that wasn't what he meant, and Pete knew it wasn't, and Danny said it again anyway. Then he stopped and started over, and what came out was smaller and more serious than anything he'd said all night. If we make it, we're coming back for you. Pete had heard that before. Everybody who breaks down says it, in the moment, and means it in the moment. Nobody comes back. He didn't say that to a 23-year-old at 4 in the morning. He told him the only payment he wanted was that the 4 of them to walk into that meeting like they belonged in the room, and not waste the thing he never got. The truck pulled out at 4 on the nose. 570 miles, 10 hours, the interstate empty, and Roy driving like a man who'd promised his little brother something. Pete stood in the lot until the taillights were gone, and then a while longer. And he went back inside and did something that made no sense at all. He kept working. The banksman came at 9, on time, with a folder and a clipboard and an apologetic way of standing. Pete met him in the doorway of the garage that had a stranger's van up on the lift with its fuel system in pieces. He explained it as well as it could be explained. The man from the bank looked at the van, looked at Pete, looked at his clipboard, and said the locks weren't being changed until Thursday, and what he didn't see, he didn't see. Small towns bury their kindness in paperwork. Pete never forgot him for it. The pump was in his hand by 8, and the van was done by noon. New pump, radiator sealed properly, oil changed, plugs cleaned, every hose he didn't trust replaced out of his own stock, because it wasn't his stock anymore, and the bank could bill him for it. He wanted that van to make Seattle. He wanted one thing leaving this building in better shape than it came in. Then he sat in an empty bay next to a van that wasn't his, in a garage that wasn't his, a full day past the life he was supposed to have started, and waited to find out how it ended. They came back the next evening in Roy's truck with the compressor gone from the back, and Pete had heard them before he saw them, because all 4 were out of the cab before it stopped rolling. They got it. Not politely, not maybe. The man from the label had kept them 2.5 hours, played the demo through twice, and signed them to a development deal in the room. 2 years to make an album. An advance with more zeros in it than the 4 of them had ever seen in one place. They stood in the lot of the foreclosed garage in Coldwater, South Dakota, shouting over each other in the cold. Pete stood there with his hands in his jacket and let it come. And something in his chest hurt in a way that he decided not to examine. Danny had cash out before the shouting had settled. A proper roll of it, borrowed against the advance, 3 times what the repair was worth. That's for the parts. Don't argue with me. Pete told him the parts belonged to the bank, and the labour was free. Then take it for the tow. Pete said there hadn't been a tow, there'd been a favour, and you don't invoice on those. Danny pushed twice more and got nowhere, and eventually he understood he was going to lose and put the money back in his jacket. Then he went to the van, dug about in a duffel bag, and came back with a cassette tape. Their demo. He put it in Pete's hand and closed Pete's fingers around it. The exact way Pete had done with the $32, and Pete saw that he knew it. Danny said when Pete heard them on the radio someday, he'd know he was part of the reason. Pete said he'd hold him to that. They left at sunset, the van running smoother than it had any right to, west towards Seattle. Pete watched the highway until it was just the highway again. Then he locked a door that wasn't his, posted the keys through the slot, put the last box in the truck, and drove through the night into Montana with a cassette tape on the passenger seat. Somewhere past Brodus, about 2 a.m, he put it in the truck player. 4 songs. They were good. They were better than good. They were the thing his band has been reaching for in 1960 and never quite got their hands on. And every mile of it hurt worse than the mile before. The kid could write, and the kid could sing, and every line of it sounded like a door Pete had painted shut himself. The tape ran out of songs and hissed. Pete ejected it, put it in the glove box, and drove the rest of the way to his brother's place in silence. He played it that once. Then it went into a shoebox, and the shoebox went wherever Pete went, for 25 years. Construction camps in Montana, a rented room in Wyoming, finally a studio apartment in Billings, and a night janitor's job at the community college. A man on his own, getting older quietly. Everything else from Coldwater got sold or left behind or worn out. The tape stayed. He never played it again. He couldn't have told you why he kept a thing he couldn't listen to, but he kept it. A Tuesday morning in 2008, Pete Kessler, 71, home off a night shift, still in the uniform, kettle on. 4 men in their 50s in the hallway of a building where nobody wore suits like those. Dark hair gone grey on the one in the front, thin face, and eyes Pete knew from somewhere before his brain would let him know where. Do you remember us? November 1983, South Dakota. You fixed our van. Pete said one word. Danny's name. And the 50-year-old millionaire, this man whose voice had been coming out of America radio for 20 years, stood in a hallway in Billings and cried like the 23-year-old he'd been on the highway. Pete had watched them happen over the years, the way you'd watch weather in the next county. He'd seen the albums come, heard them on job site radios, caught them on a television in a bar in Sheridan once, and stood there with his beer, not moving until the song finished. They'd become exactly the thing they'd been driving toward that night. He'd never told a soul he knew them. A janitor in Billings claiming he was the reason a famous band existed. He could hear how that sounded. Mostly he'd assumed they'd forgotten. 25 years, thousands of shows, a million faces between then and now. Why would 4 men like that remember one mechanic on one cold night in a town they'd never seen since? He let them in. 4 of them and him in a studio apartment, 1 room and a kitchenette, and they sat on his couch and his floor like they were still the boys from the van, and Pete stayed standing, because sitting down felt like admitting this was real. The first thing he asked was how they found him. The answer took a while, and Pete had to sit down for it after all. They'd gone back for him in 1990. First year they could breathe. First year the machine around them would let them off the road. They'd driven to Coldwater to keep the promise. The garage was gone, knocked down for a farm equipment dealership. Nobody in town had an address for him, just Montana somewhere. His brother maybe? And Roy had moved twice himself by then, so they hired someone to look. When that man came up empty, they hired another, and years later another. Pete had spent 25 years moving where the work was. No phone half the time. Paid cash more than once, the kind of man records lose track of. It had taken them the better part of 2 decades of trying, and finally 2 years of one stubborn investigator working employment roles across 3 states to put 4 men in that hallway. Pete sat on the edge of his bed and listened to that, and what got him wasn't what it must have cost. It was the years. They'd been looking almost the whole time. All those nights mopping the science building, thinking he had been a stranger on the highway to them. 1 repair among a million miles. And the whole time, there was a file open somewhere, with his name at the top, because 4 men would not let it go. He asked the only question that mattered. Why? Danny said because Pete had given them his last night in his own building and his brother and his part and had taken nothing for any of it. Because everything the 4 of them had grown into stood on a foundation, and the foundation was a man who stopped. Pete said what he'd say for the rest of his life whenever it came up. He just fixed a van. Mike leaned forward and told him the rest of it. The meeting had a hard stop. The label man had a flight out. If Roy's truck had rolled into Chicago, even half an hour later, there'd have been an empty office and a business card, and there was no second meeting. There was never going to be a second meeting, and the men who'd lent them the demo money were not patient men. They didn't like to think about that version. They'd all thought about that version. Then Joey asked him, carefully, whether he'd ever heard the third album. Pete said he'd heard bits of it, job site radios. There was a song on it, Joey said. Second single. It went a long way up the charts and stayed on the radio for about a decade, and it was on the set list of every show the four of them had played since 1989. It was about a garage on a 2-lane road in South Dakota. It'd been about Pete Kessler for 20 years. Pete had sat in his old kitchen and worked out that he had almost certainly heard it. Mopping floors, in the truck, in that bar in Sheridan, standing still with his beer. Nobody in the room said anything for a bit. Then the conversation went somewhere Pete wasn't ready for at all. Danny asked him carefully, testing the ground first, whether he'd ever got back in touch with his daughter. Pete's face answered before he could. Danny nodded, and said they'd known that, and then said a thing Pete couldn't make sense of at first. He said Julie had come to one of their shows. 5 years ago, San Diego. She was a music teacher there, married, 2 children, and at that show, or after it, she'd heard the story that follows this band around, the one about the night in South Dakota, and something in it wouldn't leave her alone. She'd written to their management. It took her months to get through the layers, but she got through, because she was Pete Kessler's daughter, and quitting clearly wasn't in the blood. What she wanted them to know was this. Her mother had told her things growing up, about why her father had disappeared. She'd believed them for years, and then she'd gotten older and pulled the court records and stopped believing them. She'd been looking for him too. She'd hit the same wall the investigators hit, a man moving through cash jobs across the mountain west, and she'd run out of road. So when she couldn't find her father, she went and found the only people on earth who were also looking for him. 2 searchers, 25 years, closing on the same man from 2 directions. Danny took an envelope out of his jacket. He said there were 2 things in it. A phone number in San Diego and something from the 4 of them that was a quarter of a century overdue. And Pete wasn't to argue about the second one, and they would know if he hadn't cashed it. He set it on the kitchen table and left it there closed. And Pete looked at that envelope, and the whole time they talked through everything else said in that little apartment, it sat there between the salt and the radio. Because of what was written on the front of it, in handwriting he didn't know. His daughter's, as it turned out. 1 word. Dad. They stayed 3 hours. They told him about the years, the albums, the countries. They left him their private numbers and made him swear to use them. Then the apartment was quiet again, and it was just Pete and the envelope. He didn't open it that day. He wanted to, but 25 years is a long time to live against a closed door. A man learns to lean his whole weight on it. When somebody unlocks from the other side, he has to work out how to stand up on his own against it first. On the second night, he took the envelope to work with him, carried it in his jacket the whole shift, through the science building and the gymnasium and the long corridor by the pool that smelled of chlorine at 4 a.m, and wrote it home again unopened. He couldn't have told you what he thought was going to happen to it in the apartment. He thought about what was fair to her. She had a family and a life that worked. What did she need with a 71-year-old janitor and everything he hadn't been there for? Her 20s, her wedding, 2 grandchildren who didn't know he existed. He sat in his chair and did that terrible arithmetic. Every missed birthday carried and totaled, and the total said, stay where you are. You're 25 years late, and late is worse than never. On the 4th day, he understood something. That arithmetic was the same arithmetic from 1960. It was the same voice that hung the Gibson on the wall. It had cost him music, and it had helped cost him Julie the first time. And now it's reaching for what was left. Pete opened the envelope, and he didn't even look at the check. He put it face down under the radio. He took the piece of paper with the number on it, and he sat it on the edge of the bed with the phone in his lap for a long time. The way you'd sit on top of cold water. Then he dialed a number in San Diego. A woman answered, 40 years old, her mother's voice, for a second, and Pete opened his mouth, and nothing came out at all. The silence went on long enough that anybody else on Earth would have hung up. She didn't hang up. She waited. And then she said the word off the front of the envelope, halfway between a question and an answer. Dad? 6 months later, Pete Kessler stood in the wings of an arena stage in Los Angeles, in a new jacket Julie had made him buy, certain he was going to be sick. Imagine standing where he's standing. Black floor, cables everywhere, a wall of noise on the other side of the rigging that you can feel coming up through your boots. 20,000 people. And a stagehand beside you holding a guitar that isn't yours, because the 4 men out there in the lights have asked you for exactly one thing in 25 years, and this is it. They'd flown him and Julie down, the grandchildren too, a boy and a girl who'd gone from not knowing they had a grandfather to having one with a spare bedroom kept for them inside 6 months. They were out in the front rows with their mother. Midway through the set, Danny stopped the show. He stood at the microphone and told 20,000 people about November of 1983, and a highway in South Dakota, and a van and a mechanic the 4 of them owed everything to, who they'd been looking for over half their lives and had finally found, mopping floors in Billings, Montana. He said the word janitor like a rank. Then he turned toward the wings and said the name, and Pete Kessler walked out into a wall of sound like weather. Danny put him in front of the microphone and asked him, in front of them all, when he'd last played for an audience. 1960. The crowd made a sound that was half a laugh and half something softer. The stagehand's guitar went over his head. Pete stood there holding it with 20,000 people waiting and said the truest thing he'd said all year. I don't know if I remember how. The band came in close around him, the way you'd stand around a man on ice, and they played the song, the one about the garage on the 2-lane road, the one he'd been hearing on the radio for 20 years without ever knowing what it was. His hands were stiff and he was a beat behind the whole way through, and he flubbed the change every time it came round, and not one person in that building cared. Least of all, the 4 men grinning at him like the boys from the van. Julie was on the front row with her hands over her mouth. The grandchildren were standing on their seats. Whatever a man is owed for one good night, Pete Kessler was paid it there, in full, in front of witnesses. He flew home 2 days later, fed the neighbour's cat that he minded, went back to work because he'd only asked for the week, and a man gives notice properly. Life settled into a new shape. San Diego at Christmas, the phone going on Sundays, a photograph of 2 children on the wall of a studio apartment where there'd been nothing on the walls at all. He sat down on the floor with it. The cassette was on top under a rubber band with his old business cards. The label was in Danny's handwriting, faded ballpoint, 4 song titles listed on side A. He hadn't properly looked at it in 25 years. Carrying it he could do. Looking was the part he never managed. He had a cassette player. Of course he did, he was 71. It sat in the kitchen under the radio, next to a check still lying face down. He put the tape in and stood at the counter while 4 songs played. It still hurt. That surprised him. After everything, after Los Angeles, it still caught him in the same old place. But it was bearable hurt now, the kind you can stand in a room with, and he made a cup of coffee and let it run, which was more than he'd ever managed before. The 4th song ended. Hiss. Pete reached out, stopped the tape, and a voice came out of the little speaker. Danny's voice, 23 years old, closed in on the microphone, with a sound behind it that Pete knew better than any music on earth. The tick of a compressor, a socket wrench being set down on steel. Kessler Auto, November 1983. Play us the one you'd have played in Chicago. Pete stood at his kitchen counter in Billings with the coffee going cold in his hands. He remembered the night perfectly. He'd never forgotten it. 3:10 in the morning, the van up on the lift, nothing to do but wait for a parts store opening. 4 exhausted kids who wouldn't sleep. Danny lifting the Gibson down off the wall over Pete's objections, wiping the dust off the strings with his sleeve. tuning it by ear and putting it into Pete's hands. And Pete, 46 years old, on his last night in his own garage, playing the song his band would have played for Columbia Records in 1960. The whole way through, once at 3 a.m. for 4 strangers. He had simply never counted it. It wasn't playing, not to him. It was one song in an empty bay for 4 kids who couldn't sleep. And by morning there was a van to finish and a truck to load and a life to start over in Montana. A favourite at 3 a.m. isn't a performance. That was how he'd always had it. So for 25 years he told people the last time he played was 1960. And he meant it. He'd said it in this kitchen. He'd said it into a microphone in front of 20,000 people. What he didn't know was that the recorder had been turning the whole time. They hadn't decided it mattered. They never did. They left it running and worked out what mattered afterwards. And this was the afterwards, arriving 25 years later in a kitchen in Billings. The only recording that exists of Pete Kessler playing, really playing, on the last night he had a garage to play in. Kept safe by 4 boys who understood before he did that it was the most valuable thing in that building. They hadn't handed him their demo that evening in the lot. They'd handed him this. On the tape, the song ends. There's a second of garage quiet, the compressor, the wind at the bay door, then 4 kids applauding.